Hey Foodies, Das Food here, and today we'll be doing my very first Dead by Daylight YouTube video. In fact, this is my very first YouTube video ever, and I thought we might as well start things off with a bang and talk about a topic that is fairly contentious within the Dead by Daylight community. That being the question of whether the spirit is so strong that she's just absolutely broken, or whether she's balanced and survivors just need to get good. To analyze this topic to the best of my ability, I'm going to break the discussion into 4 parts, beginning with an explanation of who the spirit is and how she works. After that, we're going to take a minute to look at the case for the spirit being OP, and then take another minute to look at the case against her being broken. Once we've done all that, we're going to wrap it up with a final verdict where I give my conclusion and sum up what we've talked about in the video. Not everyone's going to agree with the conclusion I come to, but all I ask is that you guys actually watch the video before rushing to the comments to tell me how wrong I am. I would love to hear your thoughts down below, but let's make sure we have a real dialogue instead of just talking past each other. With all that being said, we're just about ready to hop in and start the debate. But first, I want to give you a quick explanation of who I am and why I feel qualified to add to this debate. For those that don't know, which is likely most of you, I'm a small Dead by Daylight streamer with over 2,000 hours of experience in the game. I play a mix of killer and survivor, but I definitely skew towards killer. And while I'm not nearly as good at the game as some of the more famous killer mains, I know what I'm talking about. And to be honest, even if I don't, I mean, man, I like a good debate, and I just really felt like giving my 2 cents on this, so let's just do that, right? On that note, let's answer the question of the day and ask ourselves, is the spirit broken? Part 1. Who is the spirit? Released as part of Dead by Daylight's 9th chapter, titled Shattered Bloodline, Rin Yamaoka, or The Spirit, was added to the game in September of 2018 alongside Jamaican teacher Adam Francis and the stuff of Killer's Nightmares, the family estate map. Moving at a slower than normal 4.4 meters per second and carrying a tear radius of only 24 meters, the spirit makes up for her subpar movement speed with her special ability, called Yamaoka's Wrath. Dead by Daylight's website has a fairly flowery way of describing Yamaoka's Wrath, but it's actually a pretty simple power to explain. When activated, Spirit's power allows her to, quote, phase walk through the map at a movement speed faster than what comes to her naturally. When doing this, she's completely invisible to survivors and can only be detected by a notably loud audio cue and some other less obvious means, like the movement of the grass around her or the sound of her footsteps. As soon as the killer player releases M2, the spirit leaves her phase state and is able to attack immediately, oftentimes catching survivors off guard. So, that's who the spirit is. But why do people think she's OP? Well, let's talk about it. Part 2. The case for spirit being OP. If you've played the game for any time at all, then you probably don't need me to tell you this, but the spirit's ability is absolutely nuts. Sort of like a deadly hybrid between the abilities of the nurse and the wraith, Spirit's ability has been argued to leave little room for counterplay, and oftentimes leaves good survivors looking a little silly. You see, it may be hard to tell where the spirit is when she's phasing, but it's not exactly hard for her to know where you are. She can see moving grass, moving corn, she can hear footsteps, and most importantly, she can hear your breathing. If a spirit player has high quality pair of headphones, your only hope of getting away from her is to make 50-50 plays and hope for the best. Needless to say, having to gamble that frequently leaves good players feeling frustrated and bad to average players feeling completely defeated. Perhaps most frustrating of all though, is the perception that Spirit takes such a low amount of practice to be good with. You see, balancing in multiplayer games is at its best when it works in such a way where extremely viable characters not only have a super high skill ceiling, but also a super high skill floor. Nurse, you see, is a good example of this, in that a god tier nurse is almost always going to get at least 3 kills, while a bad or even decent nurse is going to get absolutely dumpstered more often than not. Spirit, in the eyes of many, is nowhere near as difficult to play as well as the nurse, and yet she comes extremely close to matching Dead by Daylight's best killer in terms of lethality. With Spirit, there's no learning how to hit that perfect blink, place the perfect bear trap, or hatchet hitboxes to learn how to work around. Spirit mains have only the need to know basic looping strategies and gen management to be effective, which seems like a problem because literally every other killer has to know these things as well, and most have to know an additional skill or two. For evidence of how easy it is to win with Spirit, consider that her most famous quote-unquote mind trick is literally just standing and waiting for the survivor to make a mistake. She stands still, she gets the kill. That's it, that's the trick. Obviously, Spirit is very powerful. So powerful, in fact, that the better Spirit players really don't even need perks or add-ons to be effective with her. Of course, if they do decide to run meta perks like Pop or Whispers, the survivors are going to be in for a very long game. Plus, Spirit gets exceptional value out of several good but not necessarily meta perks, such as Nurse's Calling or especially Strider. In addition to perks, Spirit is also a killer with several really nice add-ons, which are powerful enough to take her from great to terrifying. With all this being said, the case seems pretty open and shut that Spirit is OP, unless she needs a mega uber massive nerf, right? Well, there are two sides to every coin, and I don't think the issues tend to be so black and white, so let's go on and take a look at the argument from the other side. Part 3. The case against. What's important to note before going further is that nobody is arguing that the Spirit is weak or even average, or at least there's not a noteworthy amount of people making such a ridiculous claim. If you watch any tier list for Dead by Daylight's killers, I guarantee you with great confidence, with just tremendous confidence, that Spirit will always be found within the top 5 killers. More often than not, she will be found in the top 2. For some, Spirit has even surpassed the Nurse, and now stands as Dead by Daylight's most powerful killer. But, of course, we're not discussing whether or not the Spirit is powerful. We're discussing whether or not she's overly powerful. And as it happens to turn out, there is a decent case to be made that, from a balancing perspective, the Spirit is fine as she is. When looking at the killer stats behavior released in November of 2019, Spirits in red ranks were averaging a kill rate of 76%. Now, that is a high kill rate. It means she averages a 3K, for those unfamiliar with how the chart works. If you're getting 50% kill rate, you are killing 2 out of 4 survivors in more games than not. It should be noted that 2 killers had higher kill rates at the time, those being Freddy and Hillbilly. Now, Clown, the game's statistically least effective killer at that point, scored a nice kill rate around 63%, only 13% less than what the supposedly broken Spirit was earning. Now, nobody is making the case that the Clown was OP, and few good survivors complain about Hillbilly, especially after his recent nerf. So why is Spirit held as being notably unfair or unfun to play against? To put it simply, the math simply doesn't hold that the Spirit is brokenly strong or impossible to win against. Now, let's be intellectually honest and note that for as fun as it can be to look at data and to look at stats, and while those stats do hold inherent value in discussing the effectiveness of different killers, those stats do not tell the whole story. Those stats don't take into account the floor to ceiling skill barrier required to play killers well, and as such they have produced some interesting outliers, like the apparent quote-unquote weakness of killers like the Nurse and Huntress, or the supposed strength of Plague and Pig, because that's exactly what these numbers showed. They showed that Nurse and Huntress, they were lower in the percentages, but nobody's arguing that they're bad killers. Nobody's really arguing that Plague and Pig are top tier killers, or at least not many people. More people would argue they are good than would argue that Nurse and Huntress are bad. So simply put, the numbers are nice. The numbers are helpful. But the numbers are not the whole story. As for the charge that the Spirit has no counterplay, I'm going to deviate from hard, indisputable statistics and venture into the realm of opinion. I hear it brought up a lot that certain killers lack counterplay, such as Deathslinger, Pyramid Head, or Spirit, and while I'm sympathetic to that argument to some extent, I feel like it's a massive piece of the puzzle missing. It's not being accounted for, and I'm just going to come out and say it. Most Survivor players are terrible at looping, myself included. You can know all the tiles. You can bring nothing but meta perks. You can watch every true talent video YouTube has to offer. But for most survivors, they're going to see the killer, panic, and go into full-on potato mode. I have been playing this game for a long time, and I've heard survivors argue that nearly every killer is OP at some point or another. I have heard complaints about the clown, the plague, and even formerly terrible killers before they were buffed, such as Leatherface, Doctor, or even Old Freddy. Do you guys remember Old Freddy? Do you remember what that was like? Do you remember when he couldn't hit you if you weren't asleep, and he was so bad. He was so bad. I loved him, but he was so bad. But my point is, with all of these complaints, right, about all these other killers, it's not exactly uncommon for survivors to lose a game, get angry, and start feeling like a properly balanced killer, or even a bad killer, is too strong. While we're on the note of, I just mentioned buffs to Leatherface, Freddy, and Doctor. So while we're talking about nerfs and buffs, it's worth pointing out that Spirit received a nerf fairly recently as of the posting of this video. And while it wasn't on the level of Nurse's or Billy's nerfs, the changes to her passive phasing and the prayer beads add-on were a step in the right direction and gave survivors more of a chance to outwit the Spirit. She wasn't killed or rendered non-viable by the nerf. Really, all it did was make it so that she wasn't so unfairly oppressive. It could be argued, and perhaps should be argued, that this nerf was the moment when the Spirit went from being OP to just really, really good. But am I ready to make that argument? Part 4. The verdict. I could waste your time and stretch this video even further, but I'm going to come right out and say it. Final verdict: no, the Spirit is not OP. ... But she's still extremely powerful. When looking at the raw data and combining it with my many hours in the game, I just don't feel comfortable saying that the Spirit is broken, or that she's OP, or that something has got to be done about this. Is she strong? Absolutely. Does it take a great player to play her well? No, not particularly. Do I kind of want to DC every time I hear that forsaken phasing noise? Yes. Yes, I really, really do. But do any of these things mean that the Spirit is overpowered? No, they don't, and I don't believe she is. Spirit is a top 2 killer, keeping neck and neck with the Nurse in the race to be Dead by Daylight's top killer. She has an insanely strong power, good add-ons, and tremendous synergy with some of the game's better perks. For what it's worth, I would not be opposed to another small nerf. I think it could really help the survivor experience while also preserving Spirit's power to tinker with the numbers just a tad and make her a tiny bit weaker. For example, I would not be opposed to behavior making her footsteps louder or something along those lines. That said, I think she's in a nice place as she is, and that survivors who think she's OP should spend less time complaining on the Steam forums and more time upping their loop game. So in closing, Spirit is powerful and generally frustrating, but at the end of the day, I don't think she's OP. But now, I want to hear from you. That was my final take, but what do the foodies think? Am I wrong? And if so, am I super wrong or just kind of wrong? Let me know in the comments below how you feel about Spirit, and also feel free to drop a recommendation for a video you would like to see from me. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I do hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please, please, please do your best to help improve my spot in the algorithm by hitting that like button and maybe even dropping me a sub if you're feeling so inclined, right? I mean, a guy can hope. But either way, I hope to see you the next time, and until then, take care of yourselves out there. It's a crazy cool world out there, but it wouldn't be nearly as cool if you weren't a part of it. I love you, I appreciate you, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye, foodies.